America's next big mistake will make India the global winner. Now listen up. Every world power that ever existed believed they would rule forever. They convinced themselves the top spot belonged to them permanently. They figured their strength would never weaken, but strength always shifts. And America is walking right into their biggest blunder, yet that quote, what's happening right now, whether folks want to see it or not, you know what America did wrong? They got lazy. They started believing their own hype. For decades, they controlled global markets, set international rules, decided who gets what. Everyone followed along because there was no other choice. But choices multiply when you're not paying attention. And India became the choice America never prepared for. Here's the thing about India's growth. It wasn't handed to them. They earned it through decades of grinding, learning, adapting. When the world said India was too poor to matter, India quietly built their economy. When critics claimed India was too divided to succeed, India unified around progress. They took every doubt and turned it into fuel. America, quote, critical error is assuming India will behave like other nations they've dealt with. They expect India to back down when pressured, to compromise when threatened, to comply when demanded, but India operates differently. Press India and they innovate around you. Block India and they build alternate routes. Challenge India and they rise to meet it. Consider this scenario. America decides to cut off technology access to India, thinking it'll cripple their tech sector. What happens instead? India accelerates domestic innovation, creates homegrown solutions, then exports those solutions globally at lower costs. Suddenly, America's cutting themselves out of markets they used to dominate. That pattern repeats everywhere. Energy, defense, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, every sector where America tries to limit India's access becomes a sector where India develops independence. And independence becomes competitive advantage. Look at defense spending. America pours billions into weapon systems, creating expensive solutions for complex problems. India takes the same challenges and engineers simpler, cheaper alternatives that work just as well. Then they sell those alternatives to countries priced out of American systems. That's not just smart business, it's strategic disruption. The medical field tells the same story. When global health crises hit, America hoards resources and restricts exports. India scales up production and supplies the world. Guess who developing nations trust more now? The country that helps or the country that hoards? Let me explain what's really driving this shift. America built their dominance during an era when information moved slowly, when geography mattered more, when technology was scarce. But we live in a connected world now. Information travels instantly. Geography means less. Technology spreads rapidly. In this new environment, India's advantages shine brighter. They've got massive domestic markets that provide testing grounds for innovations. They've got cost structures that make their solutions globally competitive. They've got English-speaking populations that can interface with any market worldwide. These aren't temporary benefits. They're structural advantages. Meanwhile, America's advantages from the old era become disadvantages in the new one. High labor costs make their products expensive. Complex regulations slow down innovation. Political divisions prevent long-term planning. These aren't temporary setbacks. They're systemic problems. But here's America's biggest blind spot. They keep measuring strength using old metrics, military budgets, GDP size, stock market values. But real influence today comes from being useful, being needed, being the solution to problems other countries face. India figured this out early. Instead of competing directly with American strengths, they positioned themselves as the alternative when American solutions don't fit. Need affordable health care? India delivers. Want cost-effective technology? India provides. Looking for reliable partners? India shows up. This positioning strategy is genius because it doesn't require defeating America head-to-head. It just requires being there when America isn't, offering what America won't, solving what America ignores. Consider Africa as an example. America approaches African nations with conditions, requirements, political demands. India approaches with solutions, infrastructure projects, technology transfers, trade partnerships with fewer strings attached. Which approach do you think African leaders prefer? The same dynamic plays out in Asia, Latin America, even parts of Europe. Countries want options. They want partners, not bosses. India offers partnership. America still offers hierarchy. Now here's where America is about to make their fatal mistake. Recognizing India's rise, they'll likely respond with aggressive competition, economic pressure, diplomatic isolation, alliance building designed to contain Indian influence. This is exactly the wrong approach. Why? Because containment strategies work against countries that depend on you. India doesn't depend on America the way other nations do. India built their growth model around diversification, multiple partnerships, self-reliance where possible. Trying to contain a self-reliant country just pushes them to become more self-reliant. Plus, containment requires allies willing to sacrifice their own interests for American strategic goals. But why would countries give up beneficial relationships with India just to please America, especially when India offers them better deals? The mathematics don't work. America asks allies to choose between American friendship and Indian opportunities. Most will choose opportunities because opportunities create jobs, wealth, progress. Friendship doesn't pay the bills. This creates a cascade effect. As America pressures allies to limit India ties, those allies start questioning American leadership. They start exploring alternatives. They start building independent relationships. America's containment strategy backfires by pushing everyone toward exactly what they were trying to prevent: a multipolar world with India at center. Let's talk about innovation for a minute. America pioneered the tech revolution, created Silicon Valley, dominated digital platforms. But innovation doesn't stay trapped in one location forever. It flows to wherever conditions are best for growth. India created those conditions. Lower costs, higher talent density, government support, massive domestic market for testing new products. American companies started outsourcing to India for cost savings, but discovered something unexpected. Indian teams weren't just cheaper, they were often better. Now those Indian professionals are returning home, starting companies, creating an ecosystem that competes directly with Silicon Valley. But they're doing it at Indian price points, which makes their solutions accessible to markets Silicon Valley ignored. This isn't brain drain anymore, it's brain circulation. And it's creating competitive advantages America can't match without fundamentally changing their cost structure. The space sector illustrates this perfectly. NASA spends billions per mission, years in development, requires massive government support. India's space program operates on commercial timelines, delivers at commercial prices, achieves similar results. International customers are switching to Indian launch services because math matters more than prestige. This creates a cascade effect. As America pressures allies to limit India ties, those allies start questioning American leadership. They start exploring alternatives. They start building independent relationships. America's containment strategy backfires by pushing everyone toward exactly what they were trying to prevent: a multipolar world with India at center. Let's talk about innovation for a minute. America pioneered the tech revolution, created Silicon Valley, dominated digital platforms. But innovation doesn't stay trapped in one location forever. It flows to wherever conditions are best for growth. India created those conditions. Lower costs, higher talent density, government support, massive domestic market for testing new products. American companies started outsourcing to India for cost savings, but discovered something unexpected. Indian teams weren't just cheaper, they were often better. Now those Indian professionals are returning home, starting companies, creating an ecosystem that competes directly with Silicon Valley. But they're doing it at Indian price points, which makes their solutions accessible to markets Silicon Valley ignored. This isn't brain drain anymore, it's brain circulation. And it's creating competitive advantages America can't match without fundamentally changing their cost structure. The space sector illustrates this perfectly. NASA spends billions per mission, years in development, requires massive government support. India's space program operates on commercial timelines, delivers at commercial prices, achieves similar results. International customers are switching to Indian launch services because math matters more than prestige. America could compete on price, but that would require dismantling decades of established practices, entire industries, political relationships built around high-cost approaches. India started fresh with lean operations from day one. That's an insurmountable structural advantage. Energy markets show the same pattern. America's energy sector carries legacy costs, old infrastructure, environmental regulations, political complications. India's energy development happens with newer technology, streamlined processes, fewer historical constraints. They can move faster and cheaper. When global energy prices spike, India negotiates better deals because they're not locked into expensive long-term contracts. When new energy technologies emerge, India adopts them quicker because they don't have stranded assets to protect. Flexibility beats legacy every time. But the real game changer is demographic trends. America's population is aging rapidly, healthcare costs rising, labor force shrinking, social security obligations growing. These trends create enormous fiscal pressure that limits government flexibility. India, quote, S demographics run in the opposite direction. Young population, growing workforce, rising incomes, increasing consumer spending. These trends create economic tailwinds that compound over decades. America needs to support more retirees with fewer workers. India gets to invest in more opportunities with more workers. Which country do you think will have more resources for innovation, infrastructure, global expansion? Here's what American strategists should understand but probably don't. This isn't a temporary challenge they can manage with smart policies. This is a fundamental shift in global economics that rewards countries with India's characteristics: large young populations, low-cost structures, technological capabilities, political stability. America can't change their demographics overnight. They can't rebuild their cost structure quickly. They can't eliminate political divisions easily. Meanwhile, India's advantages strengthen every year through compound effects. The smart response would be partnership, leveraging India's strengths to complement American capabilities. But partnership requires accepting India as an equal, sharing decision-making authority, sometimes following India's lead. American political culture struggles with this approach. So America will likely choose competition over cooperation, confrontation over collaboration. They'll try to slow India's rise instead of adapting to it. That's the mistake that makes India the global winner. Because while America wastes energy fighting yesterday's battles, India will focus on winning tomorrow's opportunities. While America protects old advantages, India will create new ones. While America demands loyalty, India will earn respect. Now, let's dig deeper into what this really means. America built their empire on control of trade routes, control of currencies, control of information. That worked when the world was simpler, when fewer players had real power. But control becomes impossible when everyone has options. India represents the option America can't control. They can't dictate India's energy purchases. They can't determine India's trade relationships. They can't influence India's domestic policies the way they influence smaller nations. And that terrifies American planners who build careers around control-based strategies. See, America's foreign policy playbook has three basic moves: reward allies, punish enemies, ignore everyone else. But India doesn't fit cleanly into any category. They cooperate on some issues, compete on others, ignore American preferences when it suits their interests. That flexibility drives American policymakers crazy. Traditional American allies watch this and start thinking, if India can pick and choose which American policies to follow, why can't we? If India can trade with whoever they want, why can't we? If India can pursue their own interests first, why can't we? That's the beginning of the end for American hegemony. Not through military defeat or economic collapse, but through everyone else realizing they have choices they didn't know they had. Think about global supply chains. America used to be the critical link in most international trade. Companies designed supply chains around American markets, American regulations, American preferences. But supply chain disruptions taught everyone the danger of single points of failure. India positioned itself as the alternative link, not necessarily better than America, but different enough to provide redundancy. Companies started building India into their supply chains as backup. But backup became primary as India proved more reliable, more flexible, more cost-effective. Now imagine America tries to weaponize supply chains against India the way they did with other countries, threatening to cut off access, demanding compliance through economic pressure. What happens? Companies realize they need supply chains that work around America, not through America. That accelerates the shift toward India-centered supply networks. America's threats create the very outcome they're trying to prevent. Reduced American relevance in global trade. The financial sector shows similar dynamics. America's dollar dominance gave them incredible power over international transactions. Countries needed dollars to trade, needed American banks to process payments, needed American approval for major deals. But digital currencies, alternative payment systems, bilateral trade agreements denominated in local currencies, all these developments reduce dollar dependency. India is actively promoting rupee-denominated trade, building payment systems that bypass American oversight, creating financial infrastructure that works independently. Every time America threatens financial sanctions, more countries realize they need alternatives. And India provides those alternatives at scale, with reliability, with fewer political conditions attached. Let quote S talk about soft power for a moment. America dominated global culture through movies, music, brands, universities. Hollywood shaped how the world thought about success, freedom, lifestyle. American brands defined quality and status. American universities attracted the world's brightest minds. But soft power flows toward wherever people see opportunity and growth. Young people around the world increasingly look to Indian entrepreneurs, Indian innovators, Indian success stories for inspiration. They see Indians building billion-dollar companies from scratch, solving global problems with Indian solutions, achieving prosperity through different paths than traditional American models. Indian movies reach global audiences now. Indian music influences international artists. Indian fashion designers set trends. Indian restaurants define authenticity rather than adapting to local tastes. That's cultural influence flowing eastward, and cultural influence eventually becomes economic and political influence. American universities still attract international students, but many now see Indian institutes as equally prestigious for technical fields. When MIT costs $80,000 per year and IIT costs $5,000 per year for similar education quality, the math becomes obvious. Student debt versus financial freedom. Which choice makes more sense? As international students choose Indian education, the global professional networks that drive business relationships shift toward India-centered connections. Today's international students become tomorrow's business leaders, and they'll naturally prefer partnerships with people they studied alongside. The pharmaceutical industry reveals another dimension of India's strategic advantages. America's drug development costs billions, takes decades, requires massive regulatory compliance. Indian companies develop similar drugs faster, cheaper, with fewer bureaucratic obstacles. When global health emergencies happen, India scales production rapidly while America debates patent protections. When developing countries need affordable medicine, India supplies it while America calculates profit margins. Which approach wins hearts, minds, and market share? America could compete by reducing costs, streamlining regulations, prioritizing access over profits. But that would threaten entire industries built around high-cost, high-regulation models. So America chooses to protect existing interests rather than adapt to new realities. Meanwhile, India captures market after market by offering what people actually need: effective solutions at affordable prices. They're not trying to maximize profits per unit. They're trying to maximize global reach and long-term relationships. The defense sector operates similarly. American weapons systems cost enormous amounts, require extensive training, demand ongoing support contracts. India develops weapons that work effectively at lower costs with simpler maintenance requirements. For most countries, the choice is obvious. Why buy one expensive American system when you can buy 3 effective Indian systems for the same price? Why depend on American technicians for maintenance when Indian systems use standardized components available globally? America's defense industry succeeds by selling to wealthy allies who can afford premium systems. But there are only so many wealthy allies. The global market consists mostly of countries that need effective defense at reasonable cost. India serves that market while America ignores it. Over time, more countries operate Indian defense systems than American ones. They train on Indian equipment, develop Indian-compatible doctrines, build relationships with Indian defense experts. Military relationships create diplomatic relationships, which create economic relationships. That quote, how influence really spreads, not through domination, but through usefulness, not through fear, but through mutual benefit, not through control, but through partnership. Now here's the really scary part for America. All these trends are accelerating. India's advantages compound over time. Their cost structures improve as volumes increase. Their technologies advance as experience accumulates. Their relationships deepen as trust builds. America, quote, legacy advantages decay over time. Their cost structures worsen as overheads increase. Their technologies stagnate as innovation slows. Their relationships deteriorate as trust erodes. The gap widens every year. Not dramatically, not obviously, but consistently. Like water eroding stone, India's steady progress undermines America's position gradually but irreversibly. American leaders see the trends but don't know how to reverse them without fundamental changes to systems that define American power. So they'll likely choose denial over adaptation, hoping the trends reverse themselves or external events shift the dynamics back in their favor. But hope isn't strategy, wishing isn't planning, and time favors India's structural advantages over America's legacy positions. The world is changing. The question isn't whether India will rise, they're already rising. The question is whether America will adapt to that reality or fight against it. Based on historical patterns, America will probably fight, and that fight will exhaust American resources while strengthening Indian resolve. That quote, how empires end, not through conquest, but through exhaustion, not through dramatic collapse, but through gradual irrelevance. America's next big mistake will accelerate that process, creating exactly the outcome they're trying to prevent. India becomes the global winner, not by defeating America, but by succeeding while America defeats itself. Sometimes the best strategy is just staying focused on your own game while your opponent makes all the mistakes. That quote, what's happening right now. That's what's coming next. That's why America's next big mistake will make India the global winner. The shift is already underway. The momentum is building. And no amount of American pressure will stop what's already started. History moves forward, not backward. Power flows toward wherever it finds the best conditions to grow. And those conditions exist in India today more than anywhere else in the world. That's not opinion, that's reality, that's destiny.